Hello friends, welcome back to my show. This video and those that will follow soon are about Manusmriti. Manusmriti is, as you know, an Indian classical text in Sanskrit which has been much maligned and of course largely misunderstood by ignorant intellectuals, especially those who belong to the left ideology or to the feminist version of females on this planet. We shall be going into a little depth as the series of videos progresses. Manusmriti is best known because it was burnt, immolated on the 25th of December 1927 by no less than a person whom we are all familiar with and who has had tremendous impact on the politics of India, and that is Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, whom many of his followers lovingly call as Babasaheb Ambedkar. So what were the reasons that Manusmriti was burnt? And this particular incident is celebrated every year on Christmas Day. And it is a convenient flogging stick to run down Hindu ideals. Here are the reasons for burning Manusmriti in the words of Babasaheb Ambedkar himself. And I quote, "The bonfire of Manusmriti was quite intentional. It was a very cautious and drastic step, but was taken with a view of forcing the attention of caste Hindus. At intervals, such drastic remedies are necessary. If you do not knock at the door, no one will open it." In fact, as events unfolded, it appears that Dr. Ambedkar was a prolific book burner. Here is an extract from the book or a biography of Dr. Ambedkar by Keer Dhananjay. And the title of the book is Life and Mission of Dr. Ambedkar, published by Popular Prakashan on page 449. You can read through this at leisure. I'll just go for the highlights. Home member Kardju stirred the embers by saying that Dr. Ambedkar himself had drafted the constitution. To which Dr. Ambedkar retorted and said, "Sir, my friends tell me that I made the constitution, but I am quite prepared to say that I shall be the first person to burn it. I do not want it." This was 20 years after he had burnt Manusmriti. Is there a tendency or a pattern? Perhaps we could invent a word. A book is biblio in Latin and pyromania is the word for burning. So maybe Mr. Shashi Tharoor could educate us and approve if bibliopyromania is the right condition which had afflicted Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. I leave it to the audiences to decide. Let us now consider the opinion of some other wise people who were contemporaries of Dr. Ambedkar. One of them was Franklin Roosevelt, who was the President of America, and there are many similarities between these two great men. Both were economists. Roosevelt had led the country out of the Great Depression. Dr. Ambedkar had very strong economic views about the value of the rupee and how it should be fixed against a floating gold standard, and many other ideas as well, and he was having a double PhD in economics. And they were both contemporaries, as you can see from the dates shown on the screens. What Roosevelt said, and which is very important, and you can judge for yourself, is that books cannot be killed by fire. People die, but books never die. No man and no force can abolish memory. As we can see, both the men have died long back, but Manusmriti is not dead. So it is time we re-examine what exactly Manusmriti is. Note the keyword used by Roosevelt, memory. And Manusmriti is nothing but a smriti, which is memory. And we shall be talking about this at length along the video. Let us now look at some more words of wisdom from some wise men. For example, here is what Ray Bradbury says: "There are worse crimes than burning books, and one of them is not reading them." Unfortunately, as we shall see in this video, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, with due respect to him, never read Manusmriti because he was not acquainted with the language in which it was written. And further, Ralph Waldo Emerson, another great philosopher and author, said, "Every burned book enlightens the world, as it has enlightened me, and I hope it shall enlighten you through the series of videos which are going to follow." Before we continue further, it is important to know something about Ambedkar's lineage. Dr. Ambedkar was born on 14th of April 1891, and he was the last of 14 children who were born to his mother. His father's name was Ramoji Maloji Sakpal, and he was serving the British Indian Army, and the rank he held was that of a Subedar. Subedar is a very important rank. It is in fact the second highest rank of an Indian officer, just below the British commissioned officers. Further, his ancestors had all served the army of the British East India Company. In other words, he was not living in a slum or a ghetto with the other so-called Dalits or oppressed classes. He was living in clean environments of cantonments where army personnel are housed. The British Army, the non-commissioned or the junior commissioned officers as they are called, such as a Subedar or a Subedar Major, are treated with utmost respect. Even today in the army, the junior commissioned officers are called Saab. So a Subedar will be called Saab as Sakbar Saab. And a Subedar Major, which is the highest rank for a junior commissioned officer, is addressed as Major Saab. So don't make the mistake of calling a proper major, a commissioned officer, as Major Saab, because that would actually be demoting him. So much for the oppression suffered by Dr. Ambedkar in his childhood, who lived mostly in sheltered and in very safe, respectful, respectable environment of cantonments of the British Indian Army. In fact, many of the bungalows which were occupied by Subedars and Subedars Majors are today allotted to Majors and Lieutenant Colonels. Ambedkar was a complex character. You can't define him on a two-dimensional canvas. There are more dimensions to the character of Ambedkar. He was brilliant in his studies, an excellent student, a prolific speaker, and a vociferous leader. And he was a champion of the so-called untouchable classes or the depressed classes, or what are today known as the scheduled castes and tribes. Although his work has been more about castes rather than tribes. If you notice, the name Ambedkar is not his real surname. He was born into a family name of Sakpal. But this was a name given to him by his Brahmin teacher. So once again, just as we saw in the previous slide, he did not suffer any indignities, and his Brahmin teacher was gracious enough to extend his own family name to him so that the young lad would not suffer any discrimination in future. Later, this brilliant person, who later became Dr. Ambedkar, was in the employ of Maharaja of Baroda, which was an independent princely state in India before 1947. And he was employed in an important position, and very shortly later he earned a scholarship which took him straight to Columbia University. In Columbia too he found very good friends, and he was sheltered by one Mr. Naval Bathena, a Parsi. As we shall see later, Dr. Ambedkar posed as a Parsi when he sought accommodation by making false entries in the register of a Parsi Dharamshala, which was later discovered by some Parsi youth who expelled him forthwith. But that is another part of the story which we will probably take up in another video. Even though Dr. Ambedkar had been an opponent of many of the social practices of Hindus, he was no great fan of Christianity, or for that matter Islam. For example, here is a quotation from Dr. Ambedkar, who said that Christianity was not enough to end the slavery of Negroes in the United States. A civil war was necessary. This comes from a person who earned a PhD from Columbia University and had first-hand evidence of the treatment of blacks by Christian whites in United States. Dr. Ambedkar was very vocal in his criticism of Islam, and here is one quote which sums up what he meant. Islam is a closed corporation, and the distinction that it makes between Muslims and non-Muslims is very real, very positive, and very alienating distinction. As a matter of fact, Dr. Ambedkar had even explored Sikhism, and at one time he had thought of converting to Sikhism. That was to the extent he was impressed by the ideals. However, what Dr. Ambedkar thought or found was that it was better to reject the idea of conversion to Sikhism because he discovered that the British government would not guarantee the privileges that were accorded to the depressed classes, or the untouchables as he calls them, in reserved parliamentary seats. In other words, he was a very sound politician who carried a very stable head over his shoulders. It is unfortunate that he chose to remain just the leaders of the depressed classes. Ideally, he should have grown to be much bigger on the Indian scene, perhaps even the Prime Minister. But he sought himself a much smaller microscopic role of representing the scheduled castes and tribes. We are often told that Dr. Ambedkar converted to Buddhism just because he wanted to get out of the rut and the bad practices of Hinduism. But it's quite surprising to know that he actually converted to Buddhism on the 16th of October 1956. Shortly thereafter, he died on the 6th of December 1956. In other words, he remained a Buddhist for only 51 days. This fact is often overlooked by a number of people. Now here is a news item which I saw recently on the 15th of April 2021. And these are the words of the Chief Justice of India, or rather who was then the Chief Justice of India, Justice Sharad Bobde. And he said that Ambedkar had proposed Sanskrit as the national language to overcome the difficulty of acceptance of Hindi or English or any other regional language as the true representative national language. So those are wonderful ideals indeed. And it had the signatures, that means his proposal had the signatures of some mullahs, pandits and priests, and Dr. Ambedkar himself. All that points to the fact that he was a unifying factor acceptable to the mullahs, to the pandits and to the priests, which speaks a lot about Dr. Ambedkar. So that brings us to the central question, because this video or series of videos is about Manusmriti, and Dr. Ambedkar's burning of the Manusmriti is central to that. The question that should come to our mind is, did Dr. Ambedkar read Manusmriti in Sanskrit? Did he have the knowledge of the Sanskrit language? Did he make an attempt to do that? Let us see what his biographers have to say. For those of you who wish to delve deeper, Columbia University's Center for Teaching and Learning has a lot of biographical stuff on Dr. Ambedkar. I've given the link below, and what one of the sources says is that Dr. Ambedkar treats Manusmriti as the key text that justifies and describes the caste system. It is clear that Dr. Ambedkar had at least some access to the laws of Manu translated by George Bueller. These are very important words because he had some access to the book, which is a translation of Manusmriti, not the entire text probably, and it is again access to the translation, not the original Sanskrit. So when it comes to the question of could Dr. Ambedkar read and write Sanskrit, some of you might well question, does it really matter? Yeah, it does not really matter when it comes to writing the Constitution of India, participating in debates in the Constituent Assembly, but it does really matter when he takes the lead of publicly burning a book. And as we saw, burning a book does not kill ideas. Those ideas still remain in the memory. To understand any body of knowledge, you have some prerequisites. Let's take an example of quantum mechanics. These days, almost anyone with any kind of a background is only too eager to talk about quantum mechanics and philosophy. But to really understand quantum mechanics, let alone comment or criticize, you ought to have a basic understanding of so many things, which include and are not restricted to complex numbers, partial and differential equations, integral calculus, linear algebra, Fourier analysis. I could go on. All this is required to get a simple understanding. And you got to be an expert in order to comment or to trash this theory. Likewise, the prerequisites which are described in Manusmriti chapter 2 verse number 6 are described with this shloka. What it says is Vedo Akhilo Dharma Moolam Smriti Shile Cha Tadvidam Acharashchaiva Sadhunam Atmanastushtirev Cha. What does it mean in plain English? It means Vedas are the first source and the foundations of Dharma. Next, the traditions, followed by conduct of virtuous persons and the sources of knowledge. And finally, it should satisfy your thinking mind, your logical mind. It should make some kind of meaning. Now, in order to comment, let alone burn the book of Manusmriti, one should at least have a smattering of knowledge of Vedas, Dharma, traditions, conduct of virtuous people, and other sources of knowledge. And finally, it must satisfy your thinking mind. Did Mr. Ambedkar qualify to do all this on the basis of what we know from his biography? The popular narrative that is made out in the case of Mr. Ambedkar is that he wanted to learn Sanskrit from the Brahmins in India, but the Brahmins refused to teach him Sanskrit because he belonged to a lower caste. Later, he learnt Sanskrit in Germany while he was enrolled as a student in the University of Bonn. Let us see how far this popular narrative stands to scrutiny. We have plenty of evidence to show that Dr. Ambedkar did in fact enroll at the University of Bonn. In fact, his application for admission is handwritten in German, and it shows his mastery over the German language, which is quite natural because Dr. Ambedkar was a very brilliant student. And here are the admission papers or the register at Bonn University. The fact is that he did not enroll in the Department of Languages or Sanskrit or in fact Indology. He had enrolled in the Department of Economics because his PhD in economics was from Columbia University. Let us examine the first graphic. It shows here at serial number 3 that he was enrolled on the 29th of April to 1921. Here it shows his name, Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar, and as we can see, born at Mahu and coming from Bombay and an Indian national. The next graphic is about the profession or the rank of the parent or father. The first entry is for that number 2 serial number, which is Abs Joseph. His father was an engineer, but in the case of Dr. Ambedkar, it is entered as a general. Certainly, Mr. Ambedkar very well understood the difference between the rank of a Subedar, which his father held, and a general. But we are not considering these facts. However, it's not the first time that a misstatement had been made by him, as we shall see in this video. The interesting fact is that Ambedkar never took up his studies at Bonn, as he did not sign for any lectures and nor did he attend any classes. And in fact, he was taken off the rolls or the university register in less than a year, which was on the 12th of January 2022. So much for his education in Sanskrit at the University of Bonn, where he did not attend any classes. In order to understand where Manusmriti stands in the galaxy of all the literature or classical literature of the Hindus, it is important to really understand the word Manusmriti. It is made up of two words, Manu and Smriti. Manu is a word that covers a slew of ideas. It includes somebody who is a thinking, wise and intelligent person. It is also any thinking creature, and more importantly, it's also a progenitor. So Manu is the progenitor of all human race of the era that we are currently living in. Smriti is memory or a remembered tradition. In fact, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana are both examples of itihasa, and itihas is actually smriti, something as it happened and as it is remembered. Whereas Vedas are not smriti, they are shruti. They are divine words which were received by rishis. But more of that later. So presently Manusmriti is actually the remembered tradition of a person or a series of persons. Another confusion in the minds of people who are reading translations of Manusmriti in English is that the title of the book becomes Laws of Manu. That is indeed ignorance on the part of the translators, because the word for law in Sanskrit is either Vidihi, Niyamaha or Nyayah. Manusmriti is a smriti. It is not a Vidhi, it is not a Niyamaha, and nor is it Nyayah. So where did this Abrahamic concept of the laws of some divine order come into existence? It is obviously the warped mind of the Western translators. It must be understood very clearly that Manusmriti is subtitled as Manav Dharma Shastra in Sanskrit. These are three words: Manav, Dharma and Shastra. Shastra is often confused as science, and therefore there is an impression that it implies laws. However, the correct word for science is Vigyan. Shastra is actually a body of teaching or a manual or a compendium of rules. Rules are conveniences for achieving certain objectives. Manusmriti has to achieve certain objectives in social sciences, and that is why it has created a compendium of rules. Rules are amendable. They can be changed to meet the new requirements. Traffic rules are not the same across the world. That doesn't mean that any country where you drive on the left side of the road is any more chaotic or unlawful as another country where you ride on the right side of the road. So that must be very clear in the mind. The second word is dharma. Dharma does not mean religion, nor does it mean a sect. What it means is that something that is according to the nature of anything. It is in the nature of substances which have mass to have gravity, to be influenced by the field of gravitation of another object. Any object having mass has the dharma of inertia. So dharma is something that is established or is firm in law, conduct, duty and practice. And what does manav mean? Manav is actually often a word used for a human being or the entire mankind. It can also mean a cosmic period. Manu is supposed to be the progenitor of the present humankind in the present era or cosmic period. Manav is also a subject of a particular ruler. So Manav Dharma Shastra should be looked at it from that point of view and not as laws of Manu, which is an utter mistranslation. If Dr. Ambedkar had realized that Manusmriti is actually Manav Dharma Shastra, which we saw is a compendium of practices and conduct which are recommended for mankind for a given period of time and for the society. All these things are in transit. They are a dynamic feature of life. They are not laws. The fact that they are called laws of Manu is a mistranslation by ignorant translators who are steeped in their Abrahamic culture and view the world through that lens. We should not view them through an Abrahamic lens where you have immutable divine laws like Torah, Bible, Quran, 10 Commandments, etc. If Dr. Ambedkar had taken the trouble to do as much, he would not have gone on to the extent of burning a book in public, which reflects more on his knowledge rather than what is contained in the pages of Manusmriti. I shall now summarize the key points of this video. The first is the futility of book burning. Apart from being a populist measure, it has no other value. The second important point is that all the ignorance and misconception about Manusmriti arises out of mistranslation by the Western authors through the lens of Abrahamic religious lens. The third important point is Manusmriti must be seen in the larger context of the civilizational literature and where it finds its place. And lastly, we saw how it is misconceived as a book of law and what is the difference between laws, rules, dharma and such things for a harmonious growth of a society, and how that has been lost in the translations or mistranslations. We shall continue further in the rest of the videos and specifically take up points which are used by feminists and by other people of the secular brigade or the leftist brigade in order to make it into a flogging horse. So friends, that brings me to the end of this video. Thank you very much for your attention and stay tuned for the videos that follow on Manusmriti and clear the doubts in your mind so that you don't end up burning books. Knowledge empowers. Ignorance misguides.